Welcome to Atlantis, where basketball meets marketing. For our first episode, we're going to talk about storytelling. Because at its essence, marketing is storytelling. Who can create the best stories, craft the most compelling narratives? And our first guest is an expert in this space. Without further ado, I'd like to announce an Emmy Award winning producer, author, a writer, a professor, and the biggest Chicago sports fan I know, Kevin Cottrell. Thanks for coming on the show.
What's going on, man? Appreciate you for having me.
So you are currently a talent producer at Amazon with the Thursday Night Football crew. What's that been like?
Man, it's been fun. It's been a whirlwind. We've been doing it 2 years now, preparing for season three. We things happened pretty quick when we got it all together. But it's been a blast ever since. Just going around the NFL, being able to visit all the stadiums, and being able to touch fans. It was a lot different than just viewing fan reaction online. You get a real, true, authentic fan reaction feedback right away on there to set and with the talent. So it's been fun. It's been real cool to see.
Has it been a huge switch going from basketball to football?
I wouldn't say a huge switch for me. Football is probably my first love. I just worked around basketball for so long that I just developed a deeper understanding, not only of the game, but probably the business of basketball. So that was probably the only true difference for me, was just going around football and saying, okay, I know football inside and out. Obviously, big football guy, played football, but now I need to understand the business of football. And that's been probably the biggest difference between the two, the biggest transition, I would say, between the two.
Okay. No, that's interesting. Cool. Well, we'll get right into it. With our topic being storytelling, I like to always say every season, every half, every quarter, every play, there's a story within it. So, from your words, why is storytelling so important in sports marketing?
I think storytelling is the biggest key because, especially when it comes to marketing, because you want things to be memorable. Also, you're trying to inform an audience, you're trying to educate an audience. And then lastly, you're trying to persuade an audience, whether it's watch a game, eat a certain product with it, wear a certain jersey or t-shirt or paraphernalia, whatever it is. The storytelling just allows the fans, the target audience, to just kind of develop like this emotional connection to whatever it is that's being thrown their way. And then it just becomes, something that they feel like they have to be a part of. It's no different than Super Bowl becoming the biggest, event of the year in our country every year, to the point that people that don't watch football all year long, they still have Super Bowl circled on their calendar. They still have an entire event planned, regardless of their knowledge of the game, just because the way it's been marketed for so long. It's just that must-see event, the can't-miss event, and that's just what great storytelling does.
Have you seen any specific campaigns as of recent in the NBA that's caught your attention?
I haven't seen any recent ones, I would say, that caught my eyes. I've seen one that people have been talking about with Shea Gilgis Alexander
Sure, yeah.
and Chet. I have not seen the ad. If I have, I haven't paid much close attention to it to see why everybody's like so annoyed. But even in that sense, it's memorable, right? Even if it's not persuading them to do anything, or it's educating or informing, people know that commercial. And for me, that's still a success. Maybe those people take that feedback, go back to the drawing board with how they tell a story, but at the very least, it was successful in my eyes.
For sure. There's a few more that I liked as of recent. Wimby's, they put it out when the eclipse happened. They said once of a lifetime event with a once in a
Yeah.
lifetime player. And then Harden with the Volume 8.
hmm
The designer came out and said he wanted to make an unmistakable shoe for an unmistakable player. So there's been some pretty cool stories of that in the shoe game pretty recently.
Oh yeah, and that's probably one of the biggest things that stories have been told through sports marketing, from Jordan telling us we can fly, soar through the air in the Air Jordans, or using the answers to be able to cross over people. And that's what the storytelling does. It gets that person to say, man, if I can get my hands on that, So those are all probably effective examples.
Cool. Well, I know we talked about this when you were out in Dallas, but can you tell the people about your journey through your career, starting with NBA TV?
Yeah, so the journey of my career, I would say, even before NBA TV, it probably started with me growing up in Chicago. Back to storytelling, just I used to sit up watching Jordan in the '90s, and I was the kid that was not only watching all the games, reading the newspaper the next day, but all those tapes that Jordan put out, Michael Jordan's Playground, Come Fly With Me, even Hoop Dreams. Those things were all telling a story. It was motivating me in a way that kind of made me look at the game of basketball a little differently. At some point, I realized I couldn't do what those guys did, and that was okay with me, unlike maybe most kids at 11, 12. But I knew I wanted to be a part of the storytelling process. So for me, it kind of started out, I was like, okay, I'm going to be a journalist. I'm going to be on the beat. I'm going to follow these teams. I'm going to interview players. And that's going to be my job. So when I head off of college, that's exactly what it was. That was me, getting my degree in television broadcasting from Clark Atlanta University. And that bringing me to Atlanta made me say, okay, what can I do here in Atlanta that I can kind of get a head start on before school? And I was trying to get a job at TNT, which eventually housed NBA TV. So, I tried to get all type of internships. Never happened. But the grind for me didn't stop there. The writing didn't stop. Putting in my 10,000 hours, started blogging, doing a blog every week called Thoughtful Thursdays. It was just my thought on sports. But the Thursday gave me like that deadline of when to put my work up, when to go ahead and let people give me their feedback. So when the opportunity came for me to join NBA TV, I was able to navigate and talk all things NBA because I was prepared. I had been putting the time in, and there they needed a writer. And for Ahmad Rashad specifically, so there was like, we got this role called researcher. You can serve as researcher, as writer, and I'm like, sounds good to me. Didn't know what a researcher was at the time. Didn't know my responsibility would mainly be stats and information, but the opportunity to work with one of my idols in broadcasting at Ahmad, couldn't pass that up. And one of the first lessons he gave me was on storytelling. He told me how to deal with the athlete after the game ended, making sure I was asking questions that interest them and not other players and just not wasting guys' time. And from there, the next 14, 15 years, they're following the NBA from starting in 2008. It just became a part of me.
So I know you were talking about what Ahmad told you about being able to interview players and knowing what question to ask at the
Yeah.
right time. Do you have a specific example or story from that?
Yeah, well, basically, it was, let's say I would write a question for him because obviously it's 10, 12 NBA games going on. So for people that might be watching, it's like, what are you writing questions for him for? Well, we're on live and he can't keep up with all the games. So let's say we're looking at Magic Cavs, but Lakers Celtics just ended and we're going to get a player to interview. He hasn't had the opportunity to watch them, so he's going to get them cold, is what we say. So I would write 3 or 4 questions for whoever the star player was that was about to join us via satellite. And sometimes, let's say we got a player, but his teammate may have scored more. One of my questions would have immediately been like, what was it like to be on the floor as your teammate went for 40? And Ahmad, being a former player himself, would always say, if somebody came and asked me that, I'd say, just go ask him. And that was one of those things that it was like, make sure you're doing, your research, your homework. So when these people come in, you don't have to just come up with something based off the box score. We have them. We had that ability to get them in a good mood because they just won a game. So let's ask them some good questions that kind of pertains to them. If the night was just that special, like Kobe scoring 81 or 60 in his last game, sure, that warrants it. But game 22, I don't want to waste his time. And he was able to do it in a way that I was able to take heed immediately, and just a mistake I just made sure I never made again.
That's awesome. So we're gonna take a segue into your book, Ball Don't Lie. It's
Mm-hmm.
something that I enjoy reading. I think it's a very creative book. I know we've seen a lot of podcasts nowadays. So I believe Julian Edelman's podcast has a similar format, but you were the first one I've seen to have a book based on
Mm-hmm.
every chapter is a different game from a different player's perspective. You have people like Shaquille O'Neal, Isaiah Thomas, Grant Hill. What was that experience like?
It was a great experience. For me, I was starting to get to the point where I was like, man, I think I could write a book. A couple of my best friends from college have written a book, and I started really getting the itch. Like, I think I could write a book, but I don't know what I could write a book about. And it was Chris Webber's idea for me to say, man, you need to really write a book. You got all us around. It's like you're like the ultimate fly on the wall. You need to figure out how to write a book. And all I knew is I couldn't write anything that had to do with me. And so when I had this idea, it was kind of on the precipice of the podcast boom. So in today's world, that's a podcast, right? I'm interviewing these guys. I'm gonna roll out a 10-part series, sell it to Sirius or somebody off the back. Like I already got it booked. But for me, I had the book idea in my mind so long. I probably started writing a book in 2015 or 16. Released it in 2020. So I'd say in that time frame of me writing the book, podcasts started kind of hitting the scene a little more and more, heavier. And in that time frame, it was too late for me to pivot. So it was fun. It was fun for me to not only interview each one of these guys, going through these moments with them, asking them questions they'd never been asked. I remember Sam Mitchell saying, man, as a coach, I've never been asked about what I did right. I've only been asked about what I did wrong. And a whole chapter in his book was just about what he did right to stop the 73 win Warriors and nearly stopping history. So that part of it was cool. And then going back, reading over it, transcribing it, kind of reliving the moment, and then writing it out, just having fun with it, almost just being a fan with a keyboard. Probably one of the best experiences of my lifetime. I've always wanted to think, man, could I duplicate it? But some things maybe just, kind of left undone. So it was cool, man. It was one of the greatest things I did. And then being able to get Candace Parker's feedback, I told her I didn't feel like I had enough women's perspective in it because Tina Thompson was the only women's player that was interviewed for the book. And then that's when she was like, well, yeah, duh, you're talking to a woman. And like, I can only look at one chapter. And so I was like, man, what do I do? She's like, just tell me what you want me to do. And I said, you know what, would you write the forward? And just having her name on the book, on the front of the book as the first player you saw, for me, just it kind of stamped it as not only it was just a woman's player, but it was one of the greatest, if not the greatest to ever, grace the WNBA. So for me, that whole process just became fun, man. One of the once in a lifetime deals. Didn't have to spend a lot of money doing it. That was the other upside. So it was cool.
The first thing that came to mind was, how'd you go about picking this specific game?
Originally, the book was supposed to be called The Greatest Game I Ever Played. But if I ask you, like, EJ, you play sports, it's the greatest game you ever played, you might say high school, you might say an AAU game. It might not be the game on the biggest level you played on. For me, as a researcher at heart, at this point, I couldn't go back and research these games for some of these people were picking. It wasn't always an NBA game, or they just were saying, I don't know. Like, I don't have the time to think about that. Just come and ask me what you want to ask me. So from there, I went back to the drawing board. As a fan, I started trying to think, was there any big feats they were a part of? Any record set, any memorable moment that fans would immediately recognize? Like if I say Vince Carter, dunk contest. Okay, cool. So let's talk about the dunk contest. Um, for Shaq, he was a part of so many things I didn't really know. So I was like, you know what? He scored 61. There's got to be a great story in the most points he's ever scored. It was also against the Clippers. So let's do that. Richard Hamilton, for instance, that was more selfish reasons. It wasn't even really about Rip for real, for real. It was more so about Derrick Rose, and I couldn't get Derrick Rose. So for me, it was like, what's the next best thing? Somebody that was his starting backcourt mate in the game he tore his ACL in. And so it just depended on when I really sat down and thought about it. For me, and the last one, I give an example of Isaiah Thomas. I've always thought Isaiah Thomas was left out of the greats category because he doesn't have 3 rings. And so for me, I wanted to find one of his happier moments. And I think it was when they won their second one. Yeah, because he made the pass for the game winner. So it was just different things that I thought about. Steve Smith got traded. People always hear about trades, but I wanted somebody to really, really detail what it was like getting traded after being told you wouldn't get traded. And then the record he set, I think, still stands for the Spurs. Most threes in the game was against his former team. So it all came together. I didn't always know the story was going to be as good as it was. It's just kind of like, what if I told this story? And then once I got more backstory, it became the book. It just became what it was.
Was there anything about the writing process that you had to change your own thoughts on during making this book?
By the time I got to writing, I don't think so because I did so much research. So for backstory, each game I watched in totality. So I would find the game and I would watch it from beginning to end. Once I watched the game, I was taking notes. I wasn't just using box scores. I was taking notes on body language. I was taking notes on this time I was called. Why? You made a shrug after this layup. What was you thinking? And I kind of just let my research guide me on the writing process. Once I transcribed the story, I was able to read through the transcription and say, what do I want in the story and what don't I want in the story? Once I was able to highlight what I wanted in the story, I just had fun around it. So it became fairly easy from there. It was no different than me writing an article, when I was on a beat, basically.
From your entire time at NBA TV, is there a specific article that you see as your best piece of content?
Yeah, probably one of that sticks out to me is when I wanted to compare the moment Kobe Bryant announced he was going to retire. He was on a road. I think his next night was like Atlanta. So I went down into the arena to interview him and others about which jersey number should be retired. For me, I thought both should have been retired. And again, my research, stats, and information background, I was able to separate the two uniforms, break down all the stats that was he accomplished in each uniform, and the conclusion was each jersey number was a Hall of Famer in itself. Both did 10 years. Crazy number, 3 rings in eight, two in 24. Went to the final 3 times in 24. So for me, it was one of those things where it was this idea that came to life that ended up almost prophesizing what ended up happening in terms of him actually getting both jersey numbers retired. When we published the article, everybody thought I was crazy because it was like 2 days after he said I'm going to retire. But I did think it was something that should have been strongly considered, and I'm glad he did.
That's awesome. Just out of curiosity, was that the Atlanta game where he went crazy and then got hurt in the fourth quarter?
He got hurt. I want to say Dante
Dante
Jones
Jones.
ankle. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
the game. That was the game.
Cool, cool. As far as storytelling as a whole, is there any last words of advice that you have for aspiring marketers?
I say anybody that writing, the one true tip that I tell everybody, young writers, is always read your work out loud. Mainly because you could read over something and your brain is telling you it's reading correctly or spelled correctly or whatever. But when you say it out loud, it sounds just as crazy as it probably reads. It's a lot easier that way to not only pick up on mistakes, but to confirm whether or not you are okay with how something is being said. Because a lot of times, again, if you mull over something, you obsess over something so long, it'll sound good in your head, but reading over it is just a total different ballgame.
Thank you. Two of the things that I noticed that you said were one, I know the term in basketball, KYP, know your personnel. Whoever you're talking to, know how you speak to them, know what they're looking for, know what's the best way to communicate what you want. And then the other thing is keeping track of the small details. The fact that you're watching every game, you're watching the body language. You weren't just watching the best plays, you were watching every play. And
Absolutely.
that's definitely commendable. And I see why it was such a great book.
Yeah, no, it was one of those things that I knew I had to do because once I got those people time, whether it was 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, that's all I was gonna get. Probably wasn't gonna get more. So I wanted to come to them loaded. I also wanted to make them feel like the process wasn't a waste of their time. It was fun to relive this moment. I almost felt like I was like, okay, they're therapists, and I'm just putting them on the couch, making them comfortable, and kind of jogging their mind. So yeah, being detail oriented is very key in all that you do, but especially towards storytelling.
How do you fight trying to sound like other writers? How do you establish your own unique voice?
I think it becomes a repetition. After a while, you'll stop going to others first because that's pretty much what I used to do. I'm pretty sure there were certain writers that I would always flock to. If they wrote, I would like immediately like, oh my God, Mark Spears wrote an article. Let me go read Mark Spears' work. Or Gene Wojciechowski wrote a sports book. Let me go read the book. That was kind of like how I was trying to find my voice. But the first job in writing I had was actually doing obituaries for the Atlanta Journal Constitution, and that alone kind of reset the way I approach writing because it was all about detail, 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 detail. Like you got to get this person's name, age, city, date of birth, whether they were married or not, was it an extra S or not on their name. Once I got locked in on the fundamentals, then I could just have fun my way. And I think that's kind of how it goes. Once people get the fundamentals up under their feet, then you can start having fun with your work, and the rest kind of follows.
I know you said you didn't want to necessarily do that book again, but if you did, who are some current athletes that you would love to do that
If
with?
if I did it in basketball form again, I would want Draymond Green. I would probably have more women players in mind. For instance, I would probably want Candace to tell me about winning the title in Chicago. What is that like to go home after all those years in LA? It's kind of like filling a fish out of water going back home. I probably want to hear from Jamal Crawford about his, 50-point game in his last game of his career, like the oldest player to do that. I might mix it up a little bit too to get a few more college names in there. Maybe like a Juju Watkins, like a freshman. What was it like? Just being this big freshman on campus and transforming a program that's been dormant since the '90s. I probably definitely would get into more range into who I would interview. I think at first I was trying to anticipate Hall of Famers. That was my goal. So since the book has been published, Vince Carter's it's been named a Hall of Famer. Chris Webber's been named a Hall of Famer. Eventually, Candace Parker will be named a Hall of Famer. Maybe a couple others that I can't think of at the moment. But that was my goal at first. That's kind of all I was thinking about. So I would definitely probably have more range to the book.
That's awesome. So how can people find you on social media?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at KCJ underscore swish, SWISH, like basketball. That's pretty much where I'm at, getting into all my sports debates. So, a good place to find me on social.
Cool. Well, thank you for your time. I always enjoy speaking.
All right, man.